Morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Curtis. Welcome to the Kingsmead Book Fair. We, of course, are discussing the hardest task of all. We are talking about South African politics. Discussing South African politics, unfortunately, is not the hardest task of all, otherwise they wouldn't let me do it. And so we have plenty to talk about. I'm Stephen Curtis. We're joined, of course, by Anita Hunter. She is the author of The Balance of Power, Ramaphosa and the Future of South Africa. You haven't read it yet? You really must. So, Professor Susan Booysen will join us in a few moments. She's the author of Precarious Power, Compliance and Discontent under Ramaphosa's ANC. Discontent is probably a word that we could use in South Africa right now. And Oscar van Heerden is the author of 2 Minutes to Midnight, Will Ramaphosa's ANC Survive? I'm pleased to tell you that both Anita and Oscar are with us. Oscar, as you can see, is moving around slightly and just sorting himself out. Professor Booysen will join us in a little while. So I must also just mention the sponsors of the Kingsmead Book Fair are Standard Bank Wealth and Investment and Timberland. And I think I can say on behalf of the Kingsmead Book Fair, thanks very much indeed to both of the sponsors, Standard Bank Wealth and Investment and Timberland. Anita, as you're here, I'm actually going to start with you. Good morning. I suppose one of the most important things to talk about is how President Ramaphosa became president. And this is important sometimes because we forget that the way that someone becomes president actually really matters to how they stay president. And this is really important. I mean, it's really important in terms of how that actually happens. It was incredibly close. And some of your reporting, and I will never forget some of your tweeting from Nasrec, showed you how things nearly collapsed.
Yeah, Stephen, sometimes we underplay and we underestimate, the importance of that moment or the moments that preceded Ramaphosa's presidency. And sometimes, when people look at in frustration at this administration and trying to figure out, why are things the way they are, or why are things not the way they should be? There isn't a reflection of the politics that led us to where we are, and by no means going back and tracking how Ramaphosa became president is a means to sort of get him off scot-free or give him sort of an excuse card to play when he needs to. But I think it's very important to note that if anything, Ramaphosa became president as a consequence of a big compromise of political gerrymandering, if you like, to theatrical reaches. It was something that nobody could predict in the way that it unfolded, and I think that it caught everyone by surprise, those who are like us on the outside looking in, and those on the inside as well. But also, Stephen, I think that the Nasrec moment where President Cyril Ramaphosa became president, but we didn't see the continuation of that in the rest of the leadership structure of the ANC. I think it's important to go back all the way to 2012 and see how he became deputy president, how he was brought back into active politics, because that will show us what we saw later on. And that was, Cyril Ramaphosa was this businessman. He played a role in the ANC in the form of the National Disciplinary Committee. You reported extensively on that, Stephen. One can't forget those briefings around the Julius Malema expulsion. And then you had Jacob Zuma, who was very popular in the ANC in 2012. And, his supporters were livid at the fact that his deputy, Kgalema Motlanthe, dared to challenge him for the position of president. And so they needed to find a deputy president candidate. And so, by all accounts, it was Ramaphosa was the best person because he had the right amount of legitimacy in business, but at the same time, the sort of right amount of scandal in the form of what happened at Marikana. And so it was, we making this man, we fetching him from business, making him deputy president, and as a result, he's not going to be any viable contender. They obviously underestimated his political prowess in the ANC. And so come four years later, you see end of 2016, Ramaphosa then does what perhaps they didn't really expect. He openly announces that he's going to take on the proxy of Jacob Zuma, and in 2017 you saw this fierce candidate for the ANC president, trying to define himself outside of the Jacob Zuma ANC leadership, but at the same time, forming a coalition that seemed to be, reformist in some way. So you had whether that reform, I mean, we can argue, Stephen, whether that was true reform or not, but there was a sort of a reform part on one side, and you had status quo on the other side, sort of competing with each other. And in the middle, you had what came to be known in political circles as the cat. You had this unity proxy, which effectively was just a self-interested group led by Didi Mabuza, who really looked at the situation and played both sides, and at the end, went for self-interest.
What I find fascinating, I mean, you start your book with this. Ace Magashule saying to you, I mean, Ace Magashule being the prime person to bring Ramaphosa back into frontline politics. And I'm amazed at this. I mean, if you read Professor Anthony Butler's book about Ramaphosa, and I mean, it's like this, and so you literally have to put aside, I mean, a large chunk of your life to read it, but it's very rewarding to read it. He always says that Ramaphosa always has to be convinced. He always has to sort of be pushed. He will only run for an election if he really believes he will win. And yet, I wonder, and I mean, sometimes I think people appropriate too much sort of Machiavelli to Ramaphosa. I think that, everything's sort of too well organized and planned. And I mean, maybe we do. But was that always the idea that Ace Magashule was the best person to ask him to come back because he knew things would turn eventually? It was astonishing to me how quickly Ramaphosa went from being Zuma's anointed deputy in 2012 to kind of, we all knew, turning against Zuma so quickly afterwards.
Yeah. So you must remember what the scenario was in 2012, right? So Jacob Zuma is at the height of his career. He's consolidated power. The fallout with Barbie just happened. He really is at his prime at that point, right? And so who were his lieutenants? His lieutenants was Willem Kize from KZN, Ace Magashule from Free State. And the like, and so it was very for me, it was surprising that they sort of admitted to it, and obviously they had an ulterior motive in the sense that they conceded to it because it sort of it was them trying to say, hey, we brought you into politics, so don't try to distance yourself, or to active politics at least, so don't try to distance yourself away from us. We made you, and that was something that they tried to carry in contesting. I mean, you remember, Stephen, that the people who were the most brutal against the deputy president presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa in 2012 was the communists, the South African Communist Party, trade unions. They didn't buy it. They really did it. And then come 2017, a whole shift happens. And effectively, some can argue that what we saw at Nasrec was a split between the winning faction of Mangaung, right? And I mean that you see that happening in all ANC conferences, and then what you had was what was the turning point? Because there was a very amenable relationship between President Jacob Zuma and Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa at the time, right? The relationship was much better than the relationship between President Jacob Zuma and a Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe. That's just.
I mean, we forget that Ramaphosa started every speech by quoting Zuma. I mean, every speech all the time.
100%. I had spent a lot of time as a young journalist, in that period before Cyril Ramaphosa went to the Union Building. So I think it was a 2-year period or a year or so between 2012 and 2014. And there was no engagement with voters or no engagement with community without praise and sort of manifest support for Jacob Zuma. But so what is the straw that broke the camel's back? Some people argue that it was the Nene situation of 2015. Some people attributed, that it sort of would, as things became manifest in terms of the state capture project, you saw Cyril Ramaphosa sort of moving further and further away, and then being convinced that actually he has to stand up, he has to go up against Jacob Zuma. And then you saw at the end of 2016 taking the plunge, and all of 2017 mobilizing for the presidency of the ANC.
There's so much. I've often wondered, and I thought it was a conspiracy theory, but I think I'm not alone in my conspiracy theory. And where would we be without them, right? I sometimes wonder, Motlante's campaign in 2012 was so ineffectual. We all knew he didn't stand a chance. And yet, there was a certain honesty about it. Right?
Okay, I see myself on screen.
Oh, it's Professor Susie Boyson. Can you see her too? There she is.
Thank you so much.
Let's see if she's able to hear us. Professor Boyson, good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon, Stephen and Kanita. Thank you very much indeed. Trials and tribulations of this era. Thank you very much.
Not at all. I would be guilty of doing a disservice if I didn't finish my question to Kanita about a conspiracy theory, because I think people would be quite annoyed to see where it was going, and it has nothing to do with laboratories in Wuhan. So I'm going to continue with that question, and then I want to ask you about your book, Precarious. Right, Kanita, here's my conspiracy theory. I'm kidding. The point is that what we have is Motlanthe ran such a weak campaign, and I've often wondered if all he was doing was forcing Zuma to take Ramaphosa as his deputy, so that Ramaphosa could one day become president. And I say this based. That looks like Professor David Moore in the background, doesn't it? I think it is. And what that meant was that Ramaphosa had to select, that Zuma had to select Ramaphosa. The KwaZulu-Natal, and in fact the eThekwini ANC, so the ANC in Durban, the biggest branch, had to nominate him as deputy president. Once that happened, he was going to be deputy president, and that basically created the pathway for Ramaphosa to defeat Zuma in the end. Anita, that's my conspiracy theory. How do you see it?
So two things, Stephen. I asked Kgalema Motlanthe, I said, you ran a terrible campaign. Why did you do it? You ran to lose. And he said, I did it on a premise of principle. I said, if you lifted up your hand as deputy president of the ANC in that 2012 conference, you would have absolutely continued to be the deputy president of the ANC. Why did you make that, considering that you knew you were going to lose? And he said he did it on a matter of principle. Then there was another thing that in the book that I write about, a meeting that Cyril Ramaphosa had with Kgalema Motlanthe at the deputy president's official residence in Pretoria, where he then, sort of engaged with Motlanthe to say, I'm going to, go up against you. Because you remember, they had a history from the National Union of Mine Workers. And so, and obviously, Kgalema came as Secretary General of the ANC after Cyril Ramaphosa, and so there was that history. And so they almost seem to have been an arrangement. So to go as far as saying that, Kgalema Motlanthe sort of knew that, or forced the hand, could be. I mean, it's not far fetched. I hate conspiracy theories, Stephen, but I mean, it's not far fetched. But I mean, at the end of the day, you had that result. That the outcome that you had, and that obviously changed the political dynamic to where we are today. And also, fast forward, how many years it has been since 2012? 9 years, and you see now Cyril Ramaphosa outsourcing a lot of the running of the ANC processes to Kgalema Motlanthe, who, you and I know that not so long ago believed that the ANC should burn down for it to self-reform. And now you have Motlanthe heading the ANC's electoral processes, which is massive, cannot be understated at all. Kgalema Motlanthe brokering peace in the Free State, among many other processes. And I think it's very fascinating. And I think the moral of this is you can't evaluate politics today without going into the past.
Indeed. All right, we're joined now by Oscar van Heerden. So we are now all present and correct. We form a quorum. If we make any decisions about expulsion, suspensions, or stepping aside, let no court come between us. Professor Booysen, I do want to pick up. So, Finita and I have been discussing the road to power. You talk about precarious. That's the word that you use. What do you mean by that? I mean, why do you use that specific word?
Yes, Stephen, and good morning, and thank you, everybody. It is really with reference to there is so much strength. The ANC has so much dominance. It is such a total force in South African society. Yet every base of this power, when one investigates it, whether it is in party or in electoral power in relation to people directly or in the state, has got so many weaknesses in it that cannot lead us to another conclusion, but it is really very, very precarious. Just to take, for example, the ANC in election 2019, which party, which ANC were people actually voting for? There were two. Now we see slight, better, stronger emergence of the Ramaphosa faction, and yet it's not guaranteed because many of those foundations are very strong. We see the dominance in the ANC so much stronger party politically than the other parties, yet it slips precariously close to that 50% outright majority level in many ways. So many people vote for the ANC in elections compared to other political parties, yet they do not channel all their political feelings, all their observations and experiences of the ANC's politics and power and governance. All of that is not channeled into elections results. There's much protest, there's much direct democracy in between. In terms of policy, the ANC has so many policies, yet so inefficient, ineffective in many ways. People often make their own policies, take land, take e-tolls without paying for it, and that becomes de facto new policies. So all the policy making is even precarious. ANC presidency, Ramaphosa, is in many ways a precarious president. He is definitely in control, increasingly in control of the party, despite many challenges, but that could also change at many different junctures. And the way he negotiates, establishes that power is in a softer way, negotiating people into submission or hoping that a problem will go away while the processes, including the current disciplinary processes, unfold. He's sitting on a cabinet with a cabinet which really cries out for revision and reshuffling. Yes, it's such a precarious political balance between the different people represented in that cabinet that it would be a very fragile operation to do that. So around every corner, I read precarious.
There's a bigger dynamic, and I'll ask both Oscar and Finita about this after your response. But there's a bigger dynamic, isn't there, about what I would call, I mean, there's probably a better phrase for this, but I would call it a weakening of central authority. And you see it everywhere. No one can actually do what they claim they want to do, if you see what I mean. Like whether you're a mayor, whether you're Helen Zille, whether you're President Ramaphosa, whether you're, well, I mean, I suppose Julius Malema can say what he wants, but I don't know if he can do anything. Professor Booysen, I mean, would you agree with that? This is about a much bigger dynamic that's not just the ANC, but it was probably driven by the ANC too, this weakening of central authority.
Yes, we definitely see it around South Africa, that there is a much bigger diffusion of political power around different centers. And yet the ANC remains as the big party in power. But there is a big diffusion, so many centers of power, so many places where relevant political action actually takes place, not just in the ANC or in ANC formal structures, not just in those institutions established by the ANC. So it is really a type of a wall-to-wall across society. There are centers of political power all around. And that places big question marks around the big issue, and that is global in so many ways, multi-party democracy. And how relevant is it? What small fractional segment of the total political reality do we actually vote for when we go into multi-party elections? And yet that is how ultimate authority is being established.
Oscar, good afternoon, welcome. I mean, I would imagine you agree, and do you also agree with the point that it's maybe not just a South African phenomenon?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephen, and panelists. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, we see it all around. We see the kind of the Prime Minister in the UK that is fighting to hold on to offers. We see Biden and Kamala now taking a bit of flack with regards to the Middle East and so on. So definitely a much more contested space all around. Perhaps with the exception of the Chinese Communist Party, who's still keeping a firm grip on things. But even there, you know, people are beginning to challenge and question the issue around Hong Kong, around how they're dealing with Taiwan and so forth. And the fact that China feels the need to explain themselves with regards to their role in Africa and so on and so forth. Something that we would have thought would not necessarily have been the case. So I wholly agree. I do, however, want to say that the NEC of the ANC is trying to give some semblance of being in control. You know, with the president saying that we don't know what is this implosion you are talking about, all is fine, we're doing okay at the polls and so forth, which we all know, of course, is just the rosy narrative for a situation that is really a tinderbox all around the country.
Khanita, within all of this, it's really vital, the identity. So if we have a weakening of central political authority, the person who actually has the power of the state is really important, particularly in our system where they appoint a head of a national prosecuting authority, they appoint someone in charge of finance. I mean, everything comes back to finance in the end. It's so boring, but it's true. That means that the identity of Ramaphosa at this moment is actually perhaps more important than it might have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that he underplays the authority and the power that he has constantly, and he someone once argued that Ramaphosa sees himself as just a manager, someone who sits with the cabinet and just sort of manages people but that's not his job. He is commander in chief. He is the person who appoints. I mean, you and I can just sit for an hour and list and even debate whether the president should have as much authority as South African has. But the reality of it is that you can't get away with it. You can't, and so in this pandemic, where you saw the president trying to be above the running off of the state and almost like a figurehead and not someone who's actually getting his hands dirty in a way that especially in the public domain. And so for me, I find it very worrying that you have a president that has so much authority as head of state that he himself underplays that authority. He himself sort of outsources it, a lot of it to consensus building. There's something that I always harp on about. You spoke about your like for conspiracy theories, but I have this a few rants that I sort of that fire me up, and one of those rants is President Cyril Ramaphosa's perpetual appointments of these panels, these sort of outside government bodies. You see it with the what was it? What's this public enterprises council? I forget the name of it, but anyways. So public enterprise, public companies.
There's so many of them. I know exactly what you mean. This dynamic.
So you have vaccine rollout, and then you set up a this task team that's going to head this, and you set up that task team. What is your government doing? You have and you put it in the State of the Nation address. He says he's going to appoint a sort of task team to deal with corruption or to deal with anti-corruption and to bringing people from NGOs and government together. And so those consensus building stuff are very nice, very Mandela-esque. It's lovely, in an ideal world. But you do it not at the time where you have to act, where you have to fund your criminal justice system, because you're not going to have you're not going to deliver on the one thing that you promised to deliver on, and that is an anti-corruption reform agenda, because the NPA, the Hawks, the SIU, everyone is underfunded. That's just basically, are you going to succeed putting people behind bars? No, you're not, because you have not prioritized. You're not done the bold thing of saying, okay, we are stopping funding to X, Y, and Z, and we're putting all our money for the next 3 years in the criminal justice system, and we're going to try to claw back money stolen through corruption or whatever it may be. And so I believe that this consensus building, this sort of trying to get everyone on board, had its place. Maybe in that transition 2018, it was the perfect time to get buy-in into your vision, to get people, because there was obviously this huge disconnect between civil society and government and the public and the state. I understand that. But now, 4 years later, it's time for implementation. There isn't supposed to be a dialogue on corruption or a multifaceted approach to corruption. There needs to be action.
Well, I can see that Oscar van Heerden is champing at the bit. Is he playing the 5-day game?
Well, I wanted to just say, in terms of this devolution of power, I think it is quite interesting how the president opted to make it very visual that he is changing the high command of the National Defence Force. I mean, never before have we actually seen this televised. It's a behind the scenes kind of event. And I think he sent a very powerful message, because there were dissenting voices amongst MKVA and, pseudo soldiers that are at Nkandla and so forth. And I think he wanted to make it very clear that he's in charge, he's the commander in chief, and this is his National Defence Force. And their job is not to involve themselves in politics, but to actually protect the Constitution of the Republic.
I want to ask, before we go any further, because I think this is important. I mean, we talk about conspiracies and we laugh at ourselves for talking about conspiracies. But both yourself, Oscar, and you, Khanita, write particularly about the role of the State Security Agency in 2017. And Audrey Machiki is actually on the record as going back to 2007 and writing about this and saying that he was approached by 2 senior officers of the State Security Agency ahead of the ANC's Polokwane conference. And he was asked, what should we do? Should we play a political role? And as he put it, I advised them to stay out of civilian politics. And he said, we're living with the consequences of the fact they ignored my advice. He's putting it very politely, but we know, and we know from both of your books, Khanita and Oscar, that the State Security Agency played a role. Oscar, you have this great story in your book about how Ramaphosa dealt with this. It involves him sort of knocking on someone's door. What happened? This was at Nasrec.
No, absolutely. So as you know, I mean, the State Security Agency has been deeply entrenched in political factions and so forth for years, and lots of money going around, all now also coming out in the Zondo Commission and so forth. And perhaps just before the narrative, Stephen, it is, from when I interact with a lot of people took serious issue with President Ramaphosa. How could he have allowed Sidney Mufamadi and others to go to the Zondo Commission and sort of just wash the dirty linen in public and so on? What does it makes a mockery of our intelligence service and so forth. And yet, I think he did it, or he allowed it, because it was so deeply corrupt and so rotten that he wanted it to be out there, so that he could be given the mandate to actually try and change it and transform it. And so on. Of course, that's going to take a whole long process. But to come back to the Nasrec story, as you know, with the factional battles going on, Khanita will know that there was constant updates and debriefings happening in the war room. And the evening before, President Ramaphosa was informed that actually Arthur Fraser has positioned his boys in a caravan not far from the voting station, probably wanting to listen in and jam phones and so forth and so on. And the president didn't say anything. He just sort of, he noted the point and moved on the agenda. And of course, as you know, trying to keep the perceptions up, the next morning he went for his early morning walk. And he just suddenly made a detour on the walk and found himself in front of the caravan, knocked on the door and went inside. And of course, you can imagine the guys were completely befuddled and, my goodness, what do we do? And he started asking uncomfortable questions. So, what are you guys doing here? And what does this button do? And what does this knob do? And of course, they fumbled their ways through it. Eventually left a few minutes later, continued with his walk. And of course, within the hour, the caravan disappeared. Because it was very clear that the president now knew of their presence and knew that they weren't supposed to be there. So just that kind of stories that is making the rounds all the time.
Khamisa, I mean, you write a lot about the role of the State Security Agency, but that's also a very clever use of political power. What are they going to do? Shoot him? You know, if anyone else had knocked on the door, there would probably have been physical violence or no result. But when the deputy president knocks on the door at such a public event, I mean, there's nothing you can do. You have to pack up and move your caravan.
Absolutely, and I think that, I mean, it was an open secret, right? At the Nasrec conference, the level of securitization, the level of influence that was that the state security had in active ANC politics. The fact that you had agents in the buses on the way to Nasrec, that you had, the examples are manifest. Obviously, there's a court case that's happening about, grabbers, basically pulling information, us journalists, subject to surveillance, etc., etc. It was the epitome of the state security apparatus being involved in party political structures, and that's obviously the force that Jacob Zuma had. He dismantled the security cluster and then repurposed it for his own benefit. And the thing is that, but what Oscar, what really gets me, angry is that these revelations. So Ramaphosa knew that, right? So, and he was admitted to it. And then in the 2018 State of the Nation address, the first one, as president says, there's going to be an investigation. He appoints Sidney Mufamadi. This is 2018. A year later, Mufamadi gives the report. We get a redacted version in the public domain. So what has come out of Zondo is just PR theatrics. What has happened since 2019 to 2021? The State Security Agency has further deteriorated. You have a fighting between the minister and the DG. You have not had a replacement of senior managers. Yes, there's an attempt to bring in Robert McBride in the foreign branch. You have an attempt to clean up. But the reality of it is no one has been held accountable, and there's no one that has there hasn't been any meaningful change. And the worry with that is that the people, the people who are the beneficiaries of the Jacob Zuma era of dismantling these constitutional security bodies of the country, they're just waiting with their arms folded because they believe that their time is going to come back. And so there hasn't been a real cleanup of that space. There hasn't been reforms, and no one has been held accountable. And so that's why I make the point constantly that what President Cyril Ramaphosa does, or what he has been doing since he took over office, is that he keeps screaming, "The house is on fire! The house is on fire!" And then he's waiting for someone to extinguish the fire. And then when the fire is extinguished, he runs up and down the road and says, "You see, there was a fire. You see, there was a fire." Without going in and rebuilding it. The house, there's debris all around in South Africa in the apparatus of the state. And so, what are you doing to rebuild? Yes, we know there was a fire. We even know who the arsonists were, and that's what's coming out of the Zondo Commission. But that's not where you need to be. You have the responsibility and the task to rebuild the house after the fire. And now, by constantly pointing at how bad the fire was, you're doing nothing. And the people who set the house alight are watching you from next door and laughing because there's been no rebuild of the house.
Yeah. The notorious secret fund, which that is just another whole book on its own. The fact that Mhlobo could be paying Zuma 2 million rand a month whilst he is president of the republic, it's just disgusting. And of course, Stephen, don't forget, and as I say in my book, just months before Nasrec, a huge amount, tens of millions of foreign currency being stolen from the State Security Agency. and we still don't know who and what, and no prosecutions. I agree with Juanita. We need more action and less talk.
Susan Boyson, I do want to just sort of tie up this conversation around the State Security Agency. These are notoriously difficult to reform in democracies. I mean, no one's really got the balance right. I'm always amazed that Americans were told by it was Snowden, I think it was, that their conversations were being listened to, and then the elites on both parties sort of pass a bill that doesn't really make any change. And I mean, this is a democracy, and people have made the choice to live with that. And we all, every day, just tap on WhatsApp's new permissions. I mean, I did. I mean, Susan Boyson, is it too much to ask for a president to basically reform the State Security Agency?
No, definitely not by any stretch of the imagination. That is what a president is there to do. That is his task. But that is the nature of contemporary South African society, that those big governance tasks often take second place after maintaining the unity of the governing party and after keeping the peace in the governing party. That unity and peacemaking in the ANC often supersedes any pressing current governance and structuring of government considerations. And it is a water treading, kicking the can down the road, let the processes unfold, and just please do not antagonize anybody in the ANC to the point of them perhaps wanting to split the ANC or split away from the ANC or capture the people. Don't want to split away from the ANC anymore. It is about capturing and hanging onto the heart of the ANC, because splinter parties do not go anywhere. And that's so everybody wants to stay on board. And for the ANC and person like Ramaphosa in charge of the ANC, it is about keeping the ANC together, because should there be another split, should it become so intolerable for even a faction to be inside the ANC, and they know they're not going to be the majority in future, but they just want to get out and establish their own presence, that would make the main body of the ANC slip below that outright majority 50% level of support. And everybody knows the consequences of that. And for the ANC, it is therefore the primary consideration to hang on to power and to remain the dominant party, and hope in some way or another, either by the can down the road method or by incisive interventions, which are not too many, not that prevalent in our politics, but they hope that the problem will just go away or will resolve itself. And that is the story of contemporary South African politics, the dichotomy between the ANC and holding it together and actually doing meaningful things and doing incredibly important tasks, like transforming security apparatuses. And my book indeed also deals with that. And I agree with Juanita that the high-level redacted report that is available publicly, has been for a long time, and the evidence at the Zondo Commission was really a repetition of that. But that definitely had the effect of making people sit upright and notice that again. And at Nasrec, yes, despise so many of my former students, or quite a number of my former students, have been for a long time, who did end up in security services, and their faces were around all spots at the Nasrec Center, including and many times quite a few of them in the media briefings, not quite journalists or analysts, but observing every moment of every declaration or statement that was being made.
And just
they couldn't just watch it on TV like the rest of us.
Just one final thing. Whilst our own community is focused on these party political stuff, I mean, we don't even want to imagine the level of infiltration from foreign intelligence services, because no one is concentrating on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We will take questions on the chat function, which is to the right. Did that help? That right. That's the yellow text. You can write questions there for Oscar van Heerden, Juanita Hunter, Susan Boyson, and we'll try and answer them. But they're about South African politics, so some of them are probably unanswerable. I want to ask this question, and I'm going to start with Susan Boyson. So, if everything is so precarious, if the states are so riddled, if the State Security Agency is so riddled, if the corruption is so bad, if no one is fixing anything, what keeps Ramaphosa in power. And I would start with two suggestions, because I'm, supposed to be a neutral host, and we all know that went out of the window some time ago. But I would make two suggestions. The first is that there's no one who can challenge him. David Mabuza, and I will say this, and I'm going to say this again in a Daily Maverick piece, that was a shameless plug, a Daily Maverick piece on Monday. I don't think someone gets to be president of this country without doing at least some sit-down interviews. And David Mabuza has never done one. I can't find evidence of one. And I think our country is too democratic to allow that. Call me optimistic if you like, but I do think that. The second, and this is going to be very controversial, I think that there is a system of accountability coming into the system that we haven't seen in 20 years. We had a former president in court having to plead guilty or not guilty. He pleaded not guilty in the end this week. And that's a big signal that even if you commit corruption at the highest level, you can be placed in a situation where your trial is unstoppable and you now have to be found guilty or innocent. And along with that, Ace Magashule, after committing the act of corruption, gets elected to an incredibly powerful position in our country. The elite of the elite is the Secretary General of the ANC. I think we can agree to that. And yet still faces a consequence, both a legal consequence and a political consequence. So I'll start with you, Susan Boyson. Does that accountability keep Ramaphosa in power?
Yes, indeed. And I have also been writing about new era of accountability in our politics. And there is so much of it all around. People are surveying, spotting every misstep. Many other missteps are not quite in the public domain, but there is widespread societal, social media and conventional media, all media accountability that is being extracted much more than before. Everybody is watching everybody. And there are no saints in our politics anymore. The level of popular cynicism is sky high and it's growing all the time. And that really contributes to enforced accountability. We can look at the case of Zweli Mkhize and the reactions we've seen this week that testifies to that. And indeed, that does help the Ramaphosa to stay in power. And yes, so little is being done on so many fronts, but yet Ramaphosa and some around him in ANC, they've really been perfecting the art of showing that we're busy with it, we're working on it, just give us time, let this process unfold, and that they keep that hope going. And that is what they hope to take into election campaigns, also in local government elections coming up later this year. And to the extent that Ramaphosa is seen to be engaging Ace Magashule and several others, and trying to extract accountability and apply rules, even if Ramaphosa himself is not flawless, but to the extent that he's seen popularly to be doing these things, that really does help to keep him in power. The weakness of those ones around him is notorious, and that means his direct competition is not in the running. I really agree on Ndidi Mabuza. We have so conventionally seen, and it's a stepping stone. That is why Ramaphosa accepted deputy presidency of the ANC, that role playing along with Zuma in 2012 in Mangaung, because he knew that was his stepping stone, only potential stepping stone that he could have in power. But Ndidi Mabuza has probably not got that. And there is, Zweli Mkhize was a great contender amongst the top six for ascension. But I think that has suffered a big dent in this week. Gwede Mantashe is hopeful to have that, but we all know that he will not quite make that step. And so Cyril Ramaphosa remains that only candidate. And for the ANC, it is incredibly important to have a Ramaphosa-type person who we know it was a big consideration at Nasrec amongst delegates, to the extent that they were not bought beforehand, but it was a big consideration to have a presidential candidate that could actually rate in public opinion polls, in important and valid ones, higher than the ANC. Zuma had been rating way below the ANC's most optimistic levels, even if when it had gone down to the 50s. Zuma was way below that. Cyril then was the one candidate who could raise the ANC support. And public opinion polls in a year or so before Nasrec had been showing very specifically, and these polls were used by the ANC as well. They showed that the with Cyril Ramaphosa or a type of person like him in charge of the ANC, many dozens, tens of percentage points, 20 or 30% more would vote, said they would vote ANC than would otherwise have been the case for Zuma or a Zuma-aligned candidate. So those kind of things combined do help to keep him in power, definitely.
Oscar, I mean, this goes to another fundamental point that I think Susan is pointing to, which is that, in my view, and I think Susan's sort of saying the same thing, she can shake her head if she disagrees, but I think the days of the ANC being able to have an unpopular leader and still win elections are over.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, just to add my voice to your question, I agree. One of the things that the ANC is very acutely aware, and it even finds expression in its strategy and tactics document, is that we know we will not be able to physically deliver everything that is required throughout the country, given the levels of poverty, inequality, etc. But the one thing we must always get right is that we must keep hope alive. The minute people start losing hope, then we are in a serious problem.
Interesting.
And I think the ANC has got this ability to reinvent that hopefulness within the masses. And again, and I agree with Susan, that hopefulness finds expression in the fact that, and yet, you know, the Ramaphosa's administration gets a lot of flack, and rightfully so, but I do think that there's a lot of things slowly but surely that is finding progress that is happening on fronts. You know, you can, depending on the vantage point you look at the data at Eskom, if you take an interest, you would know that on the more minute level, a lot of progress is being made. People are being weeded out and so forth. And even on the prosecution side, yes, of course, we want to see the big fishes and so forth. But over the last 2.5 years, there's a number of people, what I would call your middle management types in the Eastern Cape with the toilet saga, etc., where the SIU and the Hawks have really been doing good work and arresting people. These executives of Eskom now, their assets being seized because clearly they were involved in corruption and so forth. And I think people are seeing those things. And then, of course, the element of hopefulness, I can't underestimate. I can't downplay it, because people also want to believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We can't just throw our hands up and say, that's it, it's all gone to the dogs. We have to keep on fighting.
Such an important point. Khanita, your thoughts?
Yeah, so when you talk about that hope, to keep that hope alive, that's what I see as the whole step aside issue, right? The step aside issue is just an element to create the carrot to dangle in front of voters. See, would we weeding out corruption? That's the boogeyman, not the ANC. ACE is the boogeyman. We're dealing with him. We are better than this. We're taking action. We're reforming ourselves. So you see that level of and I juxtapose it in terms of what you saw, the level of arrogance between 2014 and 2016 in terms of, say, the Nkandla debate and corruption, etc., around Jacob Zuma presidency, where they were like, the people will vote for the ANC whether you like it or not. Obviously, there's a sense of no, that's not going to happen in this time. And so what we need to do is you need to create that hope. And that was Ramaphosa, right? Is that the whole country believe that we've already hit rock bottom, and the only way is to look up, right? And so that was, here's our hero, and so building on to that, this entire issue of the ANC implementing the step aside resolution is not to create a meaningful reform. The ANC knows that at the end of the day, its branches are A, capable to manipulation, and B, its leadership is elected based on popularity. So you can, a convicted criminal can become an ANC member of the ANC. It's very normal. It's very possible. And so what it needs to do then is just to re-engineer things a little bit to say, we are taking action, we are reforming, and that they had to create a boogeyman. And I think that's what it successfully did in relation to the amount of people that have bought into the step aside thing. The reality of it is that the ANC should have not elected leaders who have rape charges against them, corruption charges against them. I mean, if you look at the accusations, a lot of the people that have been forced to step aside, I'm just quoting Mike Babuya Kulo, who's been ANC deputy chairperson in KZN, who's been hailed as a hero for stepping aside. The reality of it is that he was charged before he was even elected to that position. So it's hope, right? It's they are doing something. My grandmother in the Western Cape is not fully understanding the dynamics of the step aside, but doesn't even really understand. She probably ignores people like me and you, Stephen, but is kind of they're doing something. Ramaphosa's trying hard to get the truth out. Actually, there's no angels and demons. The ANC is not divided on those lines. There's not reformers and crooks. It's not that. It's a mix between the two. What they've realized is that you can't have the manifest crooks in the party any longer like you had it in the past, and that you can't just get away with unpopular leaders, as you said, Stephen. And I think COVID was the biggest test in that regard, is that people are fed up with corruption. You have to do something. So it may not even be really meaningful, but you need to do something, and that's the carrot that keeps being dangled.
We've got 9 minutes left, which is a pity because we could literally go on forever. I do want to ask about the opposition parties, and Oscar, I'm going to start with you because you come from the ANC, and therefore I can. But one of the things is that the opposition party seems to be shooting themselves in the foot. And let me just predicate this. Let me just say first, I have no idea what's going on with the EFF at the moment. I do not know if their ground game is stronger and better than we think. I have no idea if they're actually growing structures. All I see is Julius Malema threatening to kill a member from Mali of the Pan-African Parliament the other day. And I see them losing wards in local government elections, just not winning wards. That's all I see. What's actually going on, I have no idea. The Democratic Alliance, I have a better idea. Lack of central political authority might be the title of their manifesto, because they seem to just be falling apart, and the issue of race-based redress is something they can't get around. If the opposition parties were stronger, of course, Oscar, that would probably have forced reform in the ANC a lot earlier.
No, absolutely. I mean, we can only but encourage to have a strong opposition on all fronts. I mean, even though we have such a huge dominant party, ruling party, it is critical that we have opposition parties, and the more the merrier. We just think that they could do their affairs better in order to grow the numbers. I mean, just to start with the EFF, the reason, in my opinion, the reason why Julius is dancing and tangoing with the likes of Ace and Zuma and so forth is because he can see that populist narrative, that populist politics is not working it's not gelling with people. There was a certain period in our history, a few years ago, young, bright, black professionals and students that saw something of a bit of Marxism and a bit of left politics, but soon realized that actually these guys are just a cut of the same cloth. It's all about them as the leaders, and they're already fighting amongst themselves. And look what happened to VBS. And so they've started to lose that support. And I think Julius is, as I say, dancing with some of these elements within the ANC as a way of wanting to potentially prepare for something new and something that he would be part of if he's not going to go to jail. So that's what I think of the EFF. The DA, on the other hand, we all know, and you're right, you're absolutely right, Stephen, they've gone through an identity crisis of note, particularly over the last sort of 8-9 years. They've really tried. They took a right decision that they need to try and bring in more black members, bring more black leaders into the leadership structures. But then they got to a point at that precipice where they actually now had to tilt and become a majority black party, if you like, where we're now going full on, and they just freaked out. That's all I can say. They just freaked out. They started losing their constituency, their traditional constituency. Was like, oh my God, I'm rather going to go to FF plus.
and so on and so forth. And then, of course, Helen tries to keep the home fires burning by coming up with all kinds of rhetoric and racist statements and so forth. Yeah, it was an experiment and we tried and we failed and so on and so forth. And then finally, I think the big problem with the DA, and this is something I'm really trying to get to for people to understand, is they are not interested in running the country. I honestly believe this. The DA is not interested in running the country. They're very happy to deal with 1 or 2 provinces where they can sort of show and excel. But actually, they know that because no one talks about the fact that when they were actually running 3 metros, they completely messed it up. I mean, whichever way you want to slice it, Gqeberha, Tshwane, and Johannesburg, and so on. So, unfortunately, we have an opposition parties that is not getting their act together, that is have their own problems and challenges. And when you say to people, in the midst of all of this, if the ANC should implode, we're really going to be in trouble, they all say, oh, I don't know what you're smoking, Oscar. But I really do believe that. In many ways, it's the few sane within the ANC that is at least trying to keep something together.
John from Cape Town's on the line for you, Oscar. That's a joke. Susan Boyson, I mean, that's quite a big thing to say, that the DA isn't interested in national power.
Yes, I think hapless and identity faltering as they may be, they are actually very much interested in running the country. Although I would agree on that front that they're probably very happy if they found they have not won, because there could be a paucity of people to push into these positions. And that we saw very clearly in local government and the metros and those coalitions that were formed when political power balances shifted in those directions of not delivering outright majorities, that there were just not enough people to fill important positions. They were not prepared, like the EFF. The EFF went in on this confidence and supply agreement with the DA, for example, in Johannesburg and Tshwane, but they chose not to participate in the government, except they did accept nice portfolios where they could benefit and organize their party finances slightly better. But they did not have enough people. They didn't have, and that's therefore a story of opposition parties generally. They do not have enough people to push into the positions of public power in order to go in and do effective governance. The ANC, of course, it's debatable. Have they got that? By all indications, considering corruption and mismanagement, they don't have it either. But they have many people who have been aspiring to those positions and who have role played and who are kind of ready for better and mostly for worse to step into those positions. But I believe the DA is interested in that, and but it really faltered around the leadership issue and changing its profile. Of course, it went on this wave of anti-Zumaism, and it had a great role, participated very handsomely in helping the country get rid of Zuma, get him out of the presidencies, but it could not sustain the momentum after that. So the DA had developed a false hope in that period of mobilization against Zuma and being the torchbearer in some of the court battles, etc., and popular mobilization too, along with the EFF. But it gave them a sense of inflated growth. And when the time came and Zuma was removed, the ANC took up that slack and they won back support. And the opposition parties were just not prepared. They didn't have a longer term plan beyond what happens when Zuma is gone. How will that affect, how has that changed politics forever? So strategically, the political parties, opposition parties, are very poorly prepared for that. And the EFF, of course, it's very interesting. They are not growing at any rate that suggests that they can even catch up with a weakened DA. But the EFF is not falling apart altogether. And so they are really flatlining. And if they're flatlining, it means that they have retained the power to be a tiebreaker party in, for example, in local government elections. And that has been incredibly disruptive. But then perhaps they will also fall out of favor there because they have just had a very, very disruptive impact in the last 5 years in local government. And I believe voters are seeing that, as we're evidencing in the local government by-elections.
Oscar van Heerden, that's Anita's book you have under your chin there. Okay. Final word. Kanita, I'm going to go to Kanita. Firstly, what's the front page lead in City Press tomorrow, please? I'm sure you're on a WhatsApp group and can tell us. And secondly, local government elections. I find it impossible to predict what's going to happen in local government elections. Have you got a better sort of view on it than I do?
It's impossible to predict in terms of local government election. What I can predict is desperation for political parties like the EFF because of the Political Party Funding Act, because of COVID, because of the lack of ground support, to discredit the entire election. I worry about that. I worry about the calls around postponing the elections, particularly because of what it means. You cannot indefinitely postpone elections, but at the same time, you see what happens in India. So I am really, really worried about the credibility of the process of the elections, particularly because of these different push and pull forces.
All right, I'm going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Kanita Hunter, author of Balance of Power, Ramaphosa and the Future of South Africa. Oscar will hold it up so that you can see her book. Professor Susan Booysen is the author of Precarious Power, Compliance and Discontent under Ramaphosa's ANC. And Oscar van Heerden is the author of 2 Minutes to Midnight, Will Ramaphosa's ANC Survive? Thanks to the sponsors of the Kingsmead Book Fair, Standard Bank Wealth and Investments, and Timberland. Enjoy the rest of the conversations, the discussions. This has been recorded. You didn't know? It's been recorded, I understand, is available for a period afterwards. If you said anything wrong in this discussion, you're going to trend on Twitter. I wish you luck. Have a good weekend. Have a safe weekend. And we'll see you soon. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.